All right, good morning. It's good to see you guys. Hope everything's well in your world and that you had a great Monday evening and looking forward to everything going on in this day. It's a little cooler out there in my neck of the woods today, and I'm still wearing shorts, so I kind of refuse to let it be winter yet. Not yet, maybe at some point, but not yet. So, man, we had a great night last night. I did a little writing, but Tammy had helped me collect all my sermons. I get them kind of all over the place. I have notes from like the '80s, right? I mean, I'm that old and been preaching for that long, and so I had them all in shoe boxes and different things, and kind of had them organized. But had gotten to be a mess, so I just got the Tamster to help me sort through them all. She did like monstrous work of getting it done. But interesting, really. I mean, you start out when I first started preaching, it's 3x5 index card one. That's what you got when you were learning how to preach. And then when you started doing it in real life, you had the 5x8 index cards, and then I went to digital. And so I took a 8.5x11, folded them in half, made little booklets. Then when I got too blind to see that, I just went to the straight, large font and put them on an 8.5x11 sheet. And then you get older, you get a little, it's like, man, all the tech and everything, you just go to little books like this. So what I've been doing now forever, these little, booklets, and keep them all in that. But it just to go through those, and Tammy was like, found out, when we baptized one kid or that or the other, and it was just a lot of fun, just reminiscing about life. And about how fast it goes by. But one is the joys, the ups and downs of ministry. Some of it brings back some painful memories, and some of it's good memories. But it was just it was good yesterday afternoon, just kind of sifting through those things. And so life is what it is, right? And I'm loving where we are right now. So, hey, let's jump into the book of 1 Timothy. We're going to finish chapter 5 today, Lord willing, and then turn the page and see what the Lord has for us in chapter 6. So we've finished the concept of widows, and hope you're enjoying this study. It's a little odd, right? Because it's more practical, because it's a pastoral view. So he's actually kind of tutoring a young pastor on how to do things in the church. But we get to peer in and kind of see behind the screen, so to speak, behind the curtain, what it looks like to do ministry, especially in first century, but powerful nonetheless. So we've seen about how church ought to function in the household of God, the role of men, the role of women, elders, warning and understanding how to keep the wolves at bay, and how you deal with that. And then we looked at what do you do with the widows, those that are young, and those just practical concepts where we're gleaning insight in how we ought to treat one another. And so now Paul comes back now to the concept of Timothy concerning the plurality of elders. In the New Testament, it seems pretty definite that there was not one man who pastored the church and then you had something else. But it was kind of a plurality. There may have been one that stood out, and we've always acknowledged that, but for the most part, so we would call them kind of lead. But it should be a plurality of leadership. And this is where we find ourselves in verse 17 of chapter 5. And we just talk about honor and honesty among elders and to the elders. And when I say honesty, you'll see what I mean in a second. I mean, when there's sin in the camp, you deal with it. It's honest. There's an honest evaluation. There's an honoring evaluation. And so let's read the text and just kind of walk through it today. He says the elders, so he's shifted gears now because he's just finished talking about the widows and how to deal with all of that. And then he says, now, the elders who direct the affairs of the church. So his context is he's thinking of all the leadership and what has to happen in order to make sure a widow's on the list and who's not on the list, and how do you handle those that are a little unruly, and what do you do about these, and so he's just thinking in terms of that, and his mind is moving to leadership, and so he says this: the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor. So he's like, hey, man, you got a lot of elders, and there's a lot of time and energy that's poured into just caring for the people in the church. He said, and I want to make sure that you give them double honor. Now, you're going to see in a minute that that's just not honor like, oh, wow, we really respect them, but it has some financial means into it as well, and we'll see that in the second, in verse 18. But let's just talk about this concept of honor for a second. He said, and I don't know, listen, whatever church you go to, you'll have men that direct the affairs of the church, right? They may be called deacons, they may be called elders, they could be called a board, whatever that term is. There in most churches there is a kind of a ruling body, an office of people who have oversight. Now, a lot of times we have paid staff and they do that, but whatever they are, whatever this is, he said there are those who direct the affairs of the church. In other words, they're just taking care of the church. They're shepherding the church. They're guarding the church. They're kind of visioning, casting the church and leading the church. And he says, listen, you need to honor those people. Now, it's easy to bash the pastor, right? I mean, that's kind of easy to do. We don't like what he said this. We don't like how he did that. He's showing favoritism here. He's doing this here. And then we love to really just talk about, hey, we got the greatest pastor in the world. He's simply saying there should be an honor, an appreciation for the fact that these men called by God labor among you. Now, there's a lot of reason why we can find frustration in the church today because of high-paid pastors and prominent ones who are kind of bleeding the church and all of that. But let's just talk about the good ones. This is what he's talking about. The good, hard-working pastors who just are trying to take care of the people and do the work, and they love and they visit, they care for you in the hospital when a loved one dies and all of those things and that kind of thing. He's saying, listen, you need to honor them. Slow down long enough. Sometimes we need to be reminded to do that with our parents too, right? Hey, slow down long enough just to go, man, I appreciate my parents, right? I think that's a good thing. So, but the scriptures speak of this in several different areas. In 1 Thessalonians, we looked at previously in our studies here at the Daily Dose, he says, esteem them highly in love for their work's sake. So there should be this, you esteem them highly in love. I mean, you just love them, right? So there's this loving of a pastor. Hebrews says that you should, we haven't looked at that book yet, we'll get to there eventually, but he says, obey them and submit to them, for they have watch care over your souls as one who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not grief. And there's a sobering thought. I, as a pastor, will be held accountable for how I have led the people, right? How I've guarded their hearts and how I've had watch care over them. And I made sure they heard the word, make sure the wolves stayed away, make sure they were loved, make sure they strayed toward holiness and moved that way. And there's a judgment that falls upon a pastor for doing that. And so he says, listen, honor the ones who do that and obey them. Just come on, let's get in line. Let's go with where the church is going in that sense. And then he says this, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching, right? Especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. And so he's saying, listen, so what we discover here is there's some elders who, they weren't necessarily strong. They weren't maybe gifted in the area of preaching and teaching. They had a command of the word, but they weren't those who just were gifted in that. But they too should get honor. And so it seems like there was kind of a division of the elders, not in a disunifying way. I mean that there were some elders who kind of met the needs of the people through care and through service and through loving and through those things. And then there was another realm who did that through the teaching ministry. And so he says, if there's elders among you and they're working hard at preaching and teaching, give them double honor. What's he mean there? Hey, honor them, respect them what they do, but also pay them. Now you think, well, where does that pay come from? It just says honor. Well, look at verse 18. He says, for the scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while he's treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. Well, there's two things there. When that ox is muzzling and treading out the grain, and he's pushing that log around so that the grain is being ground up, don't put a muzzle on him as he's going around. Let him eat what's falling out and what's going around. Because why? Because it's just wrong to have this beast of burden working hard and you're not even allowing them to have any food. And so he's saying, let's make sure you do that. And then he says, the worker deserves his wages. And so what we learn here is that, listen, take care of your pastor, right? I mean, honor them and also make sure that they're cared for. If their work is full time, I mean, mine, I have a job. And Paul said, he said, listen, he said, Man, I work with my hands. I've not been a burden to you. Though I have the right to take money from you, I've not done that. And so you have those pastors who aren't taking money, but then you have those who are struggling, right? And then you have those who are cared for. And for the most part, I think in our world, in America, our pastors are fairly well taken care of. I think. I mean, I don't know, but the thing is, they should be paid. They should be cared for in that sense. And so, it's important that we see into this church and see how Paul honors what goes on. And then as he's dealing with that, he comes to verse 19. And he says, hey, listen, you're going to have people who are always going to be after him too, and they're going to find fault in all of them. So he says in verse 19, don't entertain an accusation against an elder unless it's brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. Right? He's like, hey, somebody's always going to find a problem. Don't chase down everything that somebody's saying the pastor said or did or whatever. And I'm reminded of what was written in Ecclesiastes. Don't believe everything that you hear your servant saying, for you to know that at one time you've cursed your servant, right? Is what he's saying. Hey, listen, come on, let's just lighten up. Let's let things slide here and there in the sense of not sinful things, just of careless things. But then he says this, unless it's brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. So here he's following the words of Jesus in Matthew. If your brother sins against you, go to him and reprove him. If he listens, you've won your brother. If not, take 2 or 3 that all the facts may be established, that they can hear both sides, and then sort this thing out. And if you've found resolution, great. If they don't listen to that, tell the church. Tell the elders. If they don't listen to the elders, and you treat them as an infidel, tell the church. And so what's he saying here? Listen, with an elder, they have a high standard. And so if they are doing wrong and there are 2 or 3 witnesses, you want to listen to that. And so he says there is this accountability that, so while you honor them and you esteem them highly and you make sure that they're cared for from a financial aspect so that they can live, and you're gracious with them, in the little things. But if there are 2 or 3 witnesses that are coming forth saying things, pay attention. Because that's a seat that where much is given, much is required. Let not many of you become teachers, for by you incur a stricter judgment. There's all of these things that speak of. And so when we get to verse 20, he says this, but those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone, so that others may take warning. So he says, listen, and if they're found to be in sin, well, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to reprove. Echo, that's the word there. It means to convince. You're going to convince them that they're wrong. You're going to convince everybody else that they're wrong. You're going to convict them. You're going to expose the sinning. Now, this isn't if the brothers repented of these things. You don't drag up the past in that sense. This has to do with there's this present thing in his life, and people have noticed it and have said something, and so now they're coming to Timothy to say, hey, look, man, this elder here, here's what's going on. He says, then you expose it, right? But those elders who are sinning, now that isn't that have sinned, that is that they are continually in sin, you are to reprove before everyone so that others may take warning. Why? Because a little leaven leavens the whole lump. That's what Paul has said out and about. You've got a leader who's just gossiping about everybody and ripping things up, ripping and roaring, or you've got a guy that's got this anger issue, if you've got a guy that's got these sexual issues, you just let it go, well, what's going to happen? People are going to say, well, it must be okay to do. As leader goes, so goes the people, right? A student, when he's fully taught, will be like his master. And so you let sinful leaders continue in the ranks, you're going to have a sinful flock. And so he says, let this serve as a warning, not just to the other people, but to those other elders as well. Hey, I better straighten up, right? And so this is the concept. This is the context. And then he says in verse 21, I charge you in the sight of God and Jesus Christ and the holy angels, the elect angels, the ones who didn't fall, the ones who serve before the throne night and day, who look in on us puzzled and curious about this thing called the gospel. He says, for their sake, because they're watching, keep those instructions without partiality and don't do anything out of favoritism. What's he saying? Don't play favorites with this. Just because you like that elder, that doesn't give him reason to be able to slide, right? Just because he's one of your favorite people doesn't mean they get a pass. Now, while it is true that love covers a multitude of sins, when there's one that has sinned and willfully is continuing to do that, you can't play favorites. You got to deal with it, right? Just like you would your kids, you can't play favorites with your kids. That one does wrong, you got to deal with it. So then he shifts gears, and I mean, it's fun just seeing how this thing plays out because it's a letter, it's a personal letter written to a person, not a church. And he says this: don't be hasty in the laying on of hands, and don't share in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. Timothy, don't be so quick just to go, nah, he's a good man. Let's run him in there. Be careful. Don't lay hands on one too quickly because you're going to share in his sins if you do so. What's he saying? Hey, be slow about putting people into the position of elder. So when you get rid of some because of their whatever's going on, just don't go find somebody and throw them in the position, but take some time, look through it, pray over it. Don't lay hands too hastily on one. And then he tells Timothy, because apparently Timothy's just got this weak stomach and the worries and pressures of ministry is thick. In fact, there are several times you can see where Timothy had kind of thought about just bailing on it. And Paul's like, man, you can't do that. Buck up. This is one of those. Stop drinking only water, Timothy. See, Timothy he wanted to prove himself so strong. He had taken kind of a vow of purity in a sense, kind of a Nazaritic vow in that sense. And so he had said, hey, I'm not drinking any wine, not even so that there's not even an excuse. No one can accuse me of anything. He says, stop drinking only water. Use a little wine because of your stomach and your frequent illnesses. Man, I know you're stressed and you're worried and that stuff's killing you. A little wine will calm that down. So he's saying, hey, man, take care of yourself while you're taking care of the flock and all the burdens and everything. It's okay to just take a little, chill. Just, take some wine. Let it take the edge off your stomach. Now, he's not in any way saying medicate yourself, right? I mean, in a addictive sort of way, right? He's just simply saying, hey, it's okay, Timothy. You're nervous. It's okay. Take a little wine. And then he comes down. He finishes it up by 24 and 25. And it's a great little statement. He says the sins of some are obvious. I said, look, man, I know you're trying to figure out how am I going to know whether this elder's a good one or a bad one, or how am I going to know? He goes, well, listen, if four things we're looking at. The sins of some are obvious, right? You can mark some off your list right away, right? Just so now you know. Nope, they're not ready. They're not elders. They're not it. Some sins are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. I mean, their sins go before them, and you go, oh man, look at that. Oh, that guy's a gossip. That guy's got wandering eyes. That man's got whatever. Others, their sins trail behind them, right? There's others. It's a little harder to see. But when you do your work, Timothy, sins will be exposed. You do a little work and you'll see. Hey, you'll see that, right? I mean, if you live, Tammy, you may see me as a man he's just easygoing, he's this, that, and the other, right? And my sins are kind of obvious. Well, there's some of them that you may not know, but Tammy does because she's with me and she sees, and they kind of linger there. And so she's aware of some of those. And then he says, but he flips the script too here, and he says in verse 25, in the same way, all right? So, I know you, but don't always focus on the bad, Timothy. Look, in the same way, good deeds are obvious. Some guys, man, you go, man, that's an easy one. I see him. He's got great deeds. Well, but listen, but there are others who have good deeds too, but they might not be so obvious. And you go, well, what does that mean? Well, I think what he says, in the same way, good deeds are obvious. Even those that are not obvious cannot remain hidden forever, right? There's a lot of work that people may do that you don't even know about, right? But there are others that do because they were the ones who that man gave them $500 out of his own pocket because they had some sort of need, or he paid for a vacation, or he put braces on these kids, or he paid for the schooling of these kids or the books for these kids. But he's not out there broadcasting it. You don't hear that, but there are those who have seen it. And if you start walking among the people, hey, what do you think about old Joe? Well, you're going to hear, man, listen, hey, here's what he did here, and here's what he did here. Some of it's going to be bad. Some of it's going to be good. So what Paul's saying is, Timothy, it's not that hard. Just breathe. let's just look and observe what's going on. And the good ones will rise to the top. Those are the ones that you want to place in the area of position of leadership. And so, anyway, that's the message for today. Man, I just loved walking through that with you. Kept you a little longer today. Sorry about that. Man, Lord bless you guys. And Lord willing, I'll see you in the morning.